Welcome to Authenticity Unleashed. I'm Pam Rader, your host, and I have a really special guest here today, Andres Schabelman, who is the author of the yet-to-be-released book, Captains Wanted. Andres was a successful tech entrepreneur, having been one of the first 30 Airbnb employees. He built a notable career helping expand businesses internationally. And that part of his expression culminated with him being on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange as the VP of International Expansion at Fiverr when they went public in 2019. He has a master's degree in public policy from the Harvard Kennedy School and a BA from Williams College. These accolades, among others, matter less to him now than his current dream of showing the magic and power of human connection around the world. I love that. Born and raised in New Orleans to Argentine-Jewish parents, surrounded by a broader Colombian Catholic community, in the South, Andres carries with him many identities and cultures. Those identities have allowed him to wear many masks, and as such, he has a keen awareness of how to strip himself down to a core. This is his first book that we're going to talk about today, and he attempts to show a possible map of how to get back to the core. So this is really fascinating to me, and I'm so grateful to have you here with us today, Andres. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So what an interesting background. What an interesting, like a melting pot of all kinds of influences. Will you just share a little bit about your background and you're highly educated and all of that, but that with an extra question. How did that shape you into some of the versions of yourself before you walked the path of authenticity?
Yeah. I mean, I would say even that path was authentic to me, but it was guided in many ways, I think, by a lot of ancestral trauma, honestly, because my the sort of like emphasis on education and achievement is very much like that Jewish Ashkenazi lineage from Eastern Europe, where my ancestors were probably, I know they were pushed from one place to another and a lot of persecution. So their way of ensuring that they would be okay wherever they went, wherever they were pushed to, was by being highly educated and being able to essentially be successful wherever they went. And I think those values were really much ingrained in me early on.
Right.
And I think like part of that was mixed in with, I think that was mixed in with external validation, because like in order to get your parents' love, you need to do certain things, like be externally successful. And so I really kind of bought into that idea, and I went down those paths and I achieved all these things. But at the end of the day, I realized that I was living my life for someone else's values. And at some point I had to reel it back in and figure out who I was and what my values were and what my heart desired, rather than just give in to the fears of validation and love and all those things that were coming from my headspace.
Yeah, and isn't that, you describe like the lineage, the generational expectations, and really that's like survival. That was a survival mechanism. So it's generational trauma that gets passed down, really.
Absolutely.
And then if you veer from that path, it's been my experience when we veer from the path of the expectations, especially of our caregivers, our parents, or whoever that happens to be, they get scared because their nervous systems have been wired to believe this is the way that we survive. And if you take a different path, they fear for you. And that often comes out as disapproval.
That's right. And I think my way of kind of helping them feel more secure with my own journey has been by being able to deal with the disapproval that already existed within me, because I had internalized a lot of their fears. So their fears at some point were mine. And so I had to start like an internal conversation with that part of me that wasn't, or isn't, because it's still around, that isn't happy with what I'm doing, and to have a conversation with that part of myself with a lot of compassion and love and understanding of where that voice comes from. And as I was able to calm that within myself, I could then have that conversation with my caregivers and my parents and kind of chill them out a little bit.
Right. Now,
But at first, by the way, it wasn't so seamless. I didn't know that process of talking to myself. I would often do things like I would go after an accolade. Like I remember when I was going to go to Harvard, I really almost like tunnel vision got a job, got into Harvard because I wanted to buy myself time. That's how I viewed it. I was like, I'm going to go do this thing that allows my parents to feel okay about where I am. And then that's going to buy me at least a year or two where I can go and do something that I really love or care about. And then if all else fails, I'll have this thing to fall back on. And I can, along the way, kind of like chill out those voices that are coming in my direction of like, hey, what are you doing with your life? I'd be like, hey, well, look, here's this Harvard thing that I gave you. And now I'm going to go back to doing my thing.
that's actually quite hilarious that Harvard's your backup plan.
Really,
Talk
like,
about hyperachievement as a way of, I'll just go to Harvard as a backup plan.
and I know it sounds so ridiculous. You know, another one
It's
that
awesome.
the other one that was like that was Google. I worked at Google for a hot minute. It was an awful experience. Everyone
Oh,
talks about how Google's got this amazing company to work for, and maybe compared to some other places it is, but I was like not in a good place there, and and yeah, I had a friend that had passed away, which actually the book Captains Wanted is somehow named after or is an homage to him because his last words on this planet were I am the captain of this ship. But anyway, before he passed away, I went for the last 4 months of his life to kind of be around him and his family and go through that whole process. And anyway, when he passes, I'm lost. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I just lost my best friend, and I just feel like I'm not on some sort of path. So I kind of like, I'm like, okay, what can I do to kind of alleviate all the fears that are inside of me, my parents wondering, what are you doing with your life? And so I tunnel vision, like hardcore go after a job at Google. So again, like as a way to calm the fear down, I go after this thing that I think a lot of people would see as being impressive. And that's precisely why I went after it, because I was like, okay, other people will see this as impressive. So all these other things that I'm doing, including spending 4 months, figuring out a way how to be around my dying friend, no one's ever going to think of me as being off some sort of path.
right.
But in reality, the path that I was off was actually me being on the path, because hence now I'm writing a book that is an homage to the friend that was passing away that I got a chance to be with for the last 4 months of his life.
Right. So you tunnel vision, you do these things, you achieve, achievement based esteem, right?
Yeah.
Valid, like other based esteem and achievement based esteem.
Yeah.
But at some point, I know in my own life when I was chasing that, it's like chasing your shadow a little bit. You just never quite catch it.
Correct.
And like the level of anxiety climbs and there's a breaking point. So was that the breaking point for you, like being with your friend who passed away, and like what was the sort of dark night of the soul that had you confront your I don't even want to call it off your path, but confront like which path you is true to you?
Yeah, obviously, I don't think it was just one moment, but I remember being in a relationship and I wasn't showing up in my full truth in that relationship. And my partner at the time, she, rather than contribute to my own voice inside of self-hate and shame and whatever, kind of gave me a lot of grace in that moment. And it was that grace that kind of allowed me to look at the parts of myself that I never had wanted to look at. And I had been hiding from me and others. And so there was, and also that, honestly, that voice inside of me that was like, you're bad, you're evil, you're not good, you're not worthy. That voice actually allowed me to take responsibility over my life. And when I was giving grace in that moment, like a light bulb went off in my head. And I was like, this is not who I want to be. And there's so many blind spots that I have in my life that I haven't been willing to look at. And yeah, so it was like a moment of someone else really giving me grace in not my proudest moment that actually allowed me to then kind of go on a path of being like, okay, well, where else do I have blind spots? Who really am I, and who do I want to be? Like, this isn't who I want to be. And yeah, I started to kind of like see all of the ways in which different aspects of my life kept pushing me, that weren't that, but the part that wasn't pushing me was really me. And so I wanted to kind of get a sense of who I was and what my true self was.
Yeah. I love that you just said that so much because we can't shame ourselves into expansion. We don't beat ourselves into greatness. It's those moments when someone sees something in us that we can't see ourselves and gives us the grace, and we're seen through the eyes of love, that something open in us. And I think that kind of experience is sort of universal. When it's actually, we'll bend ourselves into all kinds of different shapes to avoid punishment or to win love. But when someone gives you love that you feel is undeserved, there's just something really magical about that space for grace. Like you see, something opens up in that space. That's beautiful. I know I've been
Yeah.
teaching spiritual work for 25 years, and I own yoga studios, and I've trained hundreds of yoga teachers. And it's really been my experience as well that when we just back off and love people as they are, that's actually when they change.
Right. Right. And if you take that as a mirror for what is inside of us, then that would, by extension, mean that when we love all the parts of ourselves and we accept and love and welcome all the parts of ourselves, then true change and shifts can occur.
100%. We have this obsession in Western culture with chasing happiness. And then I believe that this false idea fed to us by media and probably a lot of corporations who want us to buy more stuff, that if you're not happy, then there's something wrong, that you have this inalienable right to constantly be searching happiness. And I'm like, well, how do you know what joy is if you haven't experienced sorrow? How do you know what peace is if you haven't experienced internal conflict? Like, the whole is the goal, to accept all parts of ourselves.
Right.
But that means we have to lay down the sword and stop being at war with ourselves. And it sounds like
Yeah.
that's really what you're kind of on a mission with your book to explore and express.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was, when you were just saying that, I think it's Brene Brown who talks about you can't like selectively numb.
Yeah.
And so, we live in that society where we want happiness and joy, and we see certain things reflected on social media, and we often like want to see all the positivity and none of the negativity, and feel those things. And so when any little bit of negativity kind of like appears in our world of emotions, we go and kind of numb it, and we try to numb it through various different ways. But in that Brene Brown kind of ethos, like, well, you can't actually just selectively numb out the pain. You're also going to be selectively numbing out all of the joy and the happiness. And so I think that aspect of acceptance is truly about figuring out a way to not label the bad as bad, and maybe even the good as good, and just sort of allow
Yes.
yourself to like feel what is. And from that place, which is the place of truth, and which is the place of like life and the fullness of life, from that place, then I think we can make more decisions that are aligned with who we actually are, not who we want to be or some idealized.
If we think about it, good and bad and fair and unfair, it's all made up. It's all made
Right.
up. Because here's the thing, I've had my heart ripped open multiple times. My son went through heroin addiction for over a decade, and we almost lost him many times. And that's a dark night of the soul, and you learn a lot. And as much as I would never wish it on anyone, it was one of the greatest things that ever happened to me in terms of getting real, learning about myself, like becoming someone who can truly love and let people be. And now when challenge comes, when what I would have tried to push away in my life comes and rips a fresh wound in my heart, I actually am grateful. I'll sit in it and be like, ooh, this doesn't feel good. And thank you, because I'm about to be expanded. I'm expanding my capacity to hold the wholeness of life. And I ask what it's teaching me. And so, but there was times in the past I would have been, this is bad, push it away. It's just subjective, good and bad and fair
Yeah,
and not fair and all that. And when we can kind of remove those labels and just be in the experience, it's like, this is what we signed up for, to be a human being,
totally. One thing that taught me a lot about this acceptance of different feelings and not labeling them in any sort of way, but just allowing them to be, was actually acting. I went down an acting path and I took these amazing classes and learned really that the most compelling thing from an audience perspective, but also from your ability to inhabit other characters, is actually to pay attention to what you're actually feeling in any given moment and use it, and not try to mask it. So for example, if you're feeling nervous while you're portraying a character, use the nervousness. It can actually make whatever the character that you're trying to portray be even more authentic and compelling from an audience perspective. And so I started to witness what I was feeling in a moment, but not from the perspective of like whether it was good or bad. I was like, no, it was all going to be usable. That's how I kind of started to exercise this muscle. And so as emotions would come through me, I'd be like, I'm nervous, I'm scared, I'm excited. And rather than think that the character needed to be a certain way or whatever, I was like, no, this is going to be something I use. And so I started to kind of exercise the muscle where I would witness from like the perspective of kind of like an outsider. Okay, this is what I'm feeling. Cool, let it come through me. And then you'd realize how fast emotions actually move through you when you don't attach to them any sort of like value,
I just love this metaphor. You're so brilliant. This idea to use use the raw material that's coming through, because what we resist persists and what we embrace dissolves, right? And so it allows you to work with, to accept, to welcome all things, and then they dissolve and make space for the next thing. And also, know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. It's so old and so beautiful. And that's really like living in truth. It's like when people come to me, I have a coaching practice and people come to me and go, well, how do I deal with this? I'm like, tell on yourself. If you're sad or you're scared or you don't know, instead of trying to pretend you know or save face or act a certain way, just say, I'm disconcerted right now, or I am sad about this, or I'm mad because mad is sad's bodyguard and I'm not sure what that's about. But just tell on yourself. So it's quite similar. It's like tell the truth,
Yeah.
live in the truth, seek the truth, and speak the truth.
Yeah, totally. And it is a hard and tender place, I know, because it's in that like being seen place that a lot of the discomfort arises for many of us, but for me specifically, because I'm like, well, can I be loved in all of myself? Because I think growing up, I didn't think of myself as being able to be loved by others unless I was something different than what I was actually feeling. And it takes me, because I can't say that I'm 100% on the other side of this, but I have to keep reminding myself.
Are.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I have to remind myself that I'm worthy of love in all of the ways in which I am.
I love that. Now, this brings me to the book. So I read your book in one day yesterday, and I was like, it was funny because I woke up in the morning and I thought, oh my gosh, I get to interview Andres tomorrow. And I realized that I thought I had more time to read the book. Thankfully, I'm a fast reader, and I opened it up and I expected to kind of skim through it and have some questions for you. And then I was said to my husband, he's sitting in bed drinking coffee beside me. I said, you need to read this book. This is really, really great. This is kind of the stuff that I teach in the spiritual realm. And the way that it's written is it invites people into sort of seeing it through their own eyes. The way you did that was very, very unique. The use of metaphor and how you share the story. It's an easy read. It's got really massive spiritual concepts that you put into very easy to understand and relatable stories. And it's universal. I think every single person wears, masks, hides themselves, and hopefully comes to a place where they have the privilege of stepping into their role as the artist, the author, the creator of their lives, and they captain their own ship. And I think that this book is going to be a smash hit. I think that every person could benefit from reading it. And I'm not just saying that. I read a ton of books, and I was not that I was surprised, I had no expectation, but I was like, wow, I love this book. I would recommend this book to my clients. So I have a couple of questions around your book.
Thanks firstly for those really kind words. I really appreciate it.
Really what my husband actually said to me, he's like, you never say that. Usually I'm reading, I'm like, what? It's like some big author. I'm like, they just wrote the same book 7 times. Why does everybody keep celebrating this? And I love like the way that you brought ancient philosophy, but you brought it in this new, fresh way. Like the way that it's written is so lovely. It's like being invited into the wardrobe in Narnia. Like you're just like, where are we going? It was really,
Well, that means a lot. Thank you.
really quite interesting. Now, one of the quotes in the book, I don't have it in front of me, so I will mess it up, that really struck me. It struck my heart and it made me do a little contemplation, and I'm going to do some journaling on this. It was something around somebody quit acting because of the applause and all of that.
Oh, yeah. Is it the J.D. Salinger quote?
Yes.
Yeah,
and basically he said, you quoted like, but do you have the courage to be nobody?
Right,
like that
right,
takes
yeah.
real courage. We're all chasing the accolades and the validation, and we're chasing the applause and to make a splash and be somebody. But do you have the courage to actually just live your life and be a nobody? And I was like, whoa.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky. It's really tricky because, yeah, I think so often in like the spiritual kind of world, we talk about how we really try not to other the ego, right? We try to make the ego a part of our expression. And it's true. The ego is always there. So it's not going anywhere. So we might as well accept it. Cool. That being said, I know that my ego can really take over. And I can really enjoy the recognition of others. There's real pleasure there. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a part of me that doesn't fully trust that I can stay true to who I am and enjoy the recognition from others, because that's exactly where I really got confused growing up.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's really hard sometimes to in fact, that then gets extended to, if I'm getting recognition from others, then therefore I can't be doing something from my heart. That's the logical extension of that.
Yeah, isn't that something? But I don't think that there's any such thing as real altruism. I think that we always get something from it. I mean, you can't separate the ego entirely from, service. It's a very interesting, it opens up a very interesting inquiry for sure.
Yeah. And I think that this kind of comes out really throughout the entire book, but this battle between the head and the heart often kind of keeps coming up. And I think I've gotten better at figuring out the hue of the emotion when it is heart-led versus the hue of the energy when it's coming from my head space, which I kind of think is often a way in which I kind of am giving in to some fears. And so when my actions are being led by fear, it's different than when my actions are being led by my heart. And I think that's kind of how I make that distinction, because I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, like I really like this recognition and that feels really good, but I also sense that it's connected to my fear of being alone or my fear of not being loved. And I'm like, okay. Let me take it in a little bit, because I want to feel that pleasure. I don't want to other my pleasure, but I also, I want to stay clear as to why it is I'm doing what I'm doing. Is it because I'm trying to calm some sort of fear? Do I really enjoy this? Is this really something that's bringing me joy and aliveness?
Yeah. And this is the battle. Many times in my career, people have said when I franchised my yoga studios at some point, and they were like, "Well, but you have to be here because it's about you." And I would say, "I don't want it to be about me." And I try to remove myself from the businesses, and then I don't want and that really shot me in the foot. Actually, I was trying to be so humble and all that, and I don't even know that was coming from any noble place. I think I wanted to be seen as humble, if I'm being,
Sure.
all of that. And then I recognized at some point, no, you actually have to be recognized to some degree to make the impact that you want to make. And that's when I started to see this balance of a seesaw and like keeping the ego in check, that I'm not being driven by that, like you see, like fear of not being liked or fear of what other people think.
Yeah.
But also recognizing I have a responsibility, if I want to create more impact in the world, that I do have to make it about me to some degree.
Yeah.
Because when I put myself out there fearlessly, then I can be up to something bigger than myself. I sort of use myself as an instrument to make a bigger impact. And I find as long as I keep that in check, and hey, I am not perfect at it. There's times I let my desire for recognition get in, a little out of hand. And I feel the hue of it. I feel there's I feel a little bit sick about it, actually. And I'll start judging other people, and I notice like my way of being changes slightly, and I can catch that and come back to like, what are you really doing here, Pam? But then false humility and trying to completely be nobody, that's also, I don't know that that's any better.
Yeah. I think one thing that you said that really resonated with me just now, which is this idea of being an instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about that often, and this is maybe where I get more of my connection to the spiritual realm, is I really feel like somehow, I don't really know the reasons or how it happens. I don't think any of us do, but I do get the sense that maybe we're all like, if you hang out in nature enough, you realize that everything is sort of an instrument of balance when it's operating in its most purest form.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal is to be an instrument of balance to this great power that is around us. And my way of being my purest form of that instrument is to be aware of where my actions are actually coming from and try to get to the core of who I am and who this instrument is. And yes, the ego and all these other things are going to have an influence on that for sure. But there is like a sense that some of that energy isn't fully clean. Like you're saying, you sense it as it being, there's like a sickness. There's like a sense that I'm not being fully clean. Like I actually don't mean that word in terms of
it's hard to put a label. It's hard to describe it. Even when I say sickness, that's not quite it, but it's like something is off in me. I feel like there's an energy that's taking up space in my body that does not need to be taking up space.
Yeah. And to come back like to happiness and joy, like I do use joy and curiosity as an emotion that feels different than some of that compulsive excitement that often is connected to this more like ego side. Like I sense a difference. Like when I start getting excited about this recognition, and it's like it plays into this like, ooh, that feels good, but it's a little like dark, and then the other one of like aliveness and joy has this like sprightliness to it.
Yeah. What I have recognized is when I know that my message has landed and I've made an impact, I love the feeling of that versus the messages on social media that I just killed it, like that doesn't matter to me. It's like there is a distinction there. But you're kind of touching on something really interesting here, which is a theme in your book, and that's like impermanence. All our feelings come and go. Who we think, even our identity, who we think we are, it's always shifting. And the one thing that I have learned is, or that I'm in the process of learning, I would be more accurate to say, is that the identity that we grow up with has been a survival mechanism. And then at any moment, we can decide who we want to be and step into that and try it on almost like clothes and say, does this feel like it fits? And so our identity is malleable. It's not permanent. It's not fixed. And we are who we say we are. And so how much shifting have you done in your identity, and where are you at with that right now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, well, one thing I wanted to add that was coming through to me when you were talking about impermanence that I think is important is actually when I make decisions, sometimes it's hard to make decisions because I feel that all the decisions that are in my life are so permanent. And when I really think about it, when I really can kind of calm myself down and get to a point where there's a flow where I'm capable of making a decision, it's usually when I've gotten to the point where I can talk to myself about that through and reassure myself that actually nothing has to be permanent. Like no state that I'm in has to be permanent. This has the ability to shift. And just that knowledge can sometimes bring about an alleviation that allows me to make more decisions to move my life forward. When it comes to identity, it's interesting. And maybe it's because in human design I'm a reflector, and that has something to do with it. But I don't really actually think of myself as having any identity. I'm aware of the projection of identity onto me. So like, let's say I'm in a relationship. I know when my partner sees me as a man. I know when they're projecting masculinity onto me. I see it in normal conversation when people expect certain things from me, but I don't necessarily feel them, those identities. I'm aware that other people see me in a certain way. And it used to bother me, but I kind of like it because I think it's like a way in. Because when people see you as something, it means that you are actively like holding on to some sort of projection for them. And if I'm being projected onto, I can use that. I can use that to change someone's mind in a way, to like expand the idea that someone has about the world around them. So for me, identity as it's projected onto me is a usable energy that I can use to transform. But for me, I recognize that different things in my life have shaped my way of thinking. Like I grew up in New Orleans. And growing up in New Orleans and in that culture really shaped a lot of the way in which I see the world. I've been to Burning Man 10 times, but people often are like, oh, you're a burner. I'm like, I guess I'm a burner because I've gone 10 times, but I don't really feel like I'm a burner. I just go consistently, you know? But when someone's like labeling me, I'm like, you think I get it. Okay, well, let me shape what's the perception that you have of burners? Cool. Let me see if I can kind of like play with that.
Right.
For example.
I love this that you're talking about like people project, because I think this is sort of the essence of, in the beginning of your book, you're talking about this, this person who's really shaped their lives to please others and never even really considered what it is that they want, just kind of went along with these projections that other people put on them and were like, oh, I guess that's who I am. And what I'm hearing in this conversation is it's the inquiry that makes us powerful. It's when we go, wait a minute, is that who I am? Am I a burner? Am I, people think because I'm a yoga teacher that I'm a certain way. And I almost think it's hilarious because, I'm not like the yoga scene where with my 1,000 malas and my deep vows of gratitude. I'm a pretty straight shooter. I swear and I drink beer and I eat meat, and yeah. And so it's like you say, it's very interesting to sort of play with that and recognize we don't have to wear the energy that people put on us.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting way to go, is my impact aligning with my intention? Is like the impact that I want to have in the world aligning with my intention? Because when people are projecting on us, sometimes that's a reflection of how we are occurring in the world for others.
That's right. But I guess I worry about, I want to hear more about that because I think there is a lot of truth there. I just think a lot about how, now that I have this online personality where I'm doing travel shows or creating comedic characters, I get a lot of comments. Some of them are real terrible, you know?
Mm.
And like for some people, for example, it doesn't matter what I do online, I'm somehow going to be seen as Jewish or white or rich or privileged. You know, all those things, I guess, are true. But they're not identities that I overly subscribe to. I can use them to my benefit or whatnot, but sometimes it feels like, at least online, I'm a projection for what someone is working through themselves in this world. And I can't necessarily do anything about it. And if I
Yeah.
overly ascribe to what my projection is in terms of how it is that I must be expressing in my life something, then I feel like I actually end up running the risk of overly catering to what isn't really about me.
Yeah. And that's where the inquiry, I think, comes in, Andres, to me, is like, is that theirs or is it mine? And is
Mm-hmm.
there is there something I'm putting out there that is not like really actually authentically who I want to put out there? Or is that just completely theirs? But I think that's where the power lies, is for us to actually go, when those things happen, not to take
Mm.
it personally, but to look and be really an inquiry. And actually, if you're not pissing people off, you're not doing anything worthwhile in the world, you know?
Yeah.
And so if you're touching some nerves and you're getting some comments, like, people throw rocks up, right? So there it's I
Yeah.
always think when you get those kind of terrible comments, I'm like, well, I guess I'm doing something.
Yeah, and I don't want to be completely, avoidant of my responsibility, because you're right. There are ways in which I contribute to the ways that people are reflecting back onto me certain
Hmm.
things. And you're right. Like, I have a choice in that moment to take responsibility, but I think beyond that, and more importantly, is the question that I ask myself is, can I stay with my goodness here
Ah,
in
I
this
love that.
place? Because even if I have some responsibility, can I still stay with my goodness? And I have an example to give you, which is when I went to Morocco. I think I have something on TikTok that has 4 million views, which
Hmm.
is me bargaining or haggling at a market with an old man.
Hmm.
And I'm doing this video to share, kind of like haggling tactics. And I can't, the reason why that video has 4 million views is because so many people are coming hard at me, being like, how dare you, with your money and your privilege, be haggling with an old man in Morocco who makes, less than you and is poor. And, at the end of the video, I actually give him more money than that, but not for the good, not for the
Hmm.
product, but because he appears in a video of mine. But in the haggling process, I stayed with my goodness despite all those comments, because it's like, no, no, no. When I'm in a foreign country, I know that I want to engage with people on the level that they're engaging with me at. And it's the most respectful thing I can do. The least respectful thing I can do is actually view this interaction as like a charity based interaction where I'm supposed to right some wrong in the world that is true. But if
Hmm.
I'm engaging in a cultural activity like haggling in a market, I'm going to haggle in the market.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yes, I'm aware that these power dynamics in the world exist. And I'm aware that, these economic disparities exist. Is it fully my responsibility to right those wrongs? Probably not. Did I right the wrong? Did I make it right in terms of using this person's likeness on my videos? Yes. Did I
Mhm.
engage in an egalitarian and human way with this person in the way that he wanted to be engaged with in their local culture? Yes. So it's like, can I stay with my goodness in this moment despite getting all of this backslash in society, in the internet sphere? And where is my responsibility here? I think
Mhm.
my responsibility is in making sure that someone whose face and likeness I'm using is being compensated. But my goodness still is in engaging with people as equals, and I can stay with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful. I love that example. I recently was at a retreat in Mexico with a group of coaches, and these are people who've done a lot of shadow work, and all the things. And so there's no, everybody's in the deep end, And there was a gentleman there, a lovely man who was he was a Muslim man who was really struggling with being against a lot of what the Muslim culture is about, but then also against what the Muslim culture is perceived as. And he was really struggling with business aspects. And so I was sitting with him, and I said to him, I asked him if he was open to, we were there to coach, right? And so it was like, are you open to a perspective? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, what I sense from you is this energy of being against something, not instead of what am I for? And I said, Mother Teresa was asked to march against war, and she said no, but she would march for peace. And he looked at me and he goes, well, that's a really privileged point of view. That's a really privileged place to come from. And he's like, and it's basically no surprise that a white woman of your privilege would say that to me. And so it was a kind of a similar situation. And I my immediate thing, I felt a little bit defensive. And then I was like, wait, no, we're just both human beings, and I've been hurt and he's been hurt. And I looked at him and I just held his hand and I said, I didn't feel very privileged when my husband was choking the life out of me. And I had to, like I said, we've all been oppressed, and I'm your friend here. And I'm just sharing some love with you. And I really wanted to stay out of judgment for him. Like that was just his own pain. But same thing, can we stay with our goodness? I love that expression. And and then he was like, oh my gosh. It was like he woke up almost, Of course, we're all just human beings doing the best we can. And can we just show up in love for each other and like leave all of that labeling and all that stuff behind, because then we don't even see each other. It's like somebody puts a glass of water in front of your face and you can't even see them when you're talking to them, because all you see is your story about them.
Totally.
What do you want the readers of your book to come away with? What would be success for you in terms of this piece of art that you're putting out into the world?
Right. I think that everything that I do is somehow connected to wanting to encourage others to be able to come back to their own power and their own self and their own sovereignty, and to return to the place where they can connect to their own core. And so the book is written in second person. It, for the most part, the main character doesn't really have a gender. It's kind of, the main character is meant to be a sort of vessel for the reader to kind of step into and potentially, hopefully, identify with some of that character's journey, so that as someone is going through the process of working through life and trying to figure out like what it is that their purpose is, they can see themselves in this book, and maybe it can be somewhat of a blueprint to give people a little bit of some agency in returning back to themselves. I never wanted to be a thought leader who told people how to live their lives, because I thought that that would be kind of running contrary to what my goals were. And so I really wanted this book to be sort of like it's a novel, but it also has like a self-help component to it, but it's not written from the perspective of a thought leader who knows what's best for someone. It's really about like an experience that a reader has that might create some emotions and maybe some discomfort, so that then they can kind of like feel into what it is that they want in their own life.
That's what I loved about it, though, is that because I think I don't know about you, but when somebody tells me what to do, I don't usually do it. I don't love being told what to do. I don't think anyone really particularly loves being told what to do, because on some level we intuit that what I'm doing currently is wrong, and therefore I'm not smart, or I'm not enough, or I'm foolish, or whatever, when someone else presumes to give me advice, like you should do this thing. And you have done a brilliant job of just allowing, like, I love that the characters kind of like couch surfing and, and just like, that's like a thing now. There's so many people that wind up in that kind of situation. And I though that particular thing wasn't my experience, I could see it was very easy to put myself into the character. It was very easy to see the ways in which that translated into my life. And it felt, because it's second person, it felt gentle. It felt like allowing the reader to discover for themselves without feeling threatened to the place where they go right into defending their way of being right now. And so that second person was brilliant, and this gentle, and you used the word grace earlier, it gives readers the grace to discover for themselves without feeling threatened, which I thought was extraordinary.
That was really important for me. I think probably the most important consideration that I had when writing a book that had an aspect of a character going through like a self-discovery journey is like, I really didn't want to be a source of telling someone how to live their life. Because honestly, I don't know if you've heard in the tone in this conversation, but I haven't figured it out. I'm still figuring it out. So how could I just,
Me too.
How could I be someone, right? How could I be someone who sits there and writes something and tells someone how to live their life when I haven't figured it out myself? I'm going through it. I'm figuring out how to be the captain of my own ship. And if I were to sit there and tell people how to do it, I feel like we would just be, we would be another we would be another example in this world where we have a bunch of mostly dudes running shit in certain capacities that are telling other people how to live their lives, even though they haven't figured it out, but doing it with such confidence that makes you believe that you're so far away from where you need to go. And so you just think of yourself as being so far away from being able to be where you're going to get to. And then you give all away your power to these flawed humans and then think that they're going to solve all your problems. In reality, you've just abandoned the very source of your solutions, which has been, always will be within yourself. But what do I know?
Yeah. You know what? Like it's so true. I feel like also a lot of people say, well, you need to do some personal development. I say, you don't need to do anything. You could do none of this work and have a beautiful life. Depending on how you interpret everything around you, you could never confront your shadow and think that you had a wonderful, and good for you. And I don't want, not everybody's going to swim in this area of the pool, and that's okay. And that's okay. But I think that there's great power in sharing our stories in terms of, well, if I have been in the darkness and I walked this way, and it's taken me a little further out of the darkness than I was, and I'm happy to reach a hand back and show you the way that I went if you're interested.
Yeah.
It's kind of the approach.
Yeah. And I think I really truly believe like there is no, to go back to this idea of to be the instrument of balance, we don't have any concept of what role we're playing in this larger balancing act. And if you just want to be a mom, if you just want to be an Uber driver, if you just want to be whatever it is that you are doing, that's more than fine. Like there's a way in which what you are doing is actually enough to be the instrument of balance. There's nothing that says you have to be anything. Look, right now I'm wearing this mask of thinking that this is how I'm going to create change in the world. But maybe at the end of the day, I'm just going to be, a farmer in the middle of nowhere and raising a family. And that will be enough. Because we don't need to look that far back in our past to look at the ways in which our individual actions have an effect on the larger whole. This interaction that I'm having with you, as long as it's happening from a place of authenticity and truth, is enough to change the world. If that's what we even want. Yeah.
Right. And then there's moments when I think, am I arrogant to think that the world needs to be changed? It's like,
well, I mean, not only that, but are you arrogant enough to believe that you can even do anything about it?
Right. I know. It's a really, those are some big questions. Now, you said to me before we got on air that you were a little bit nervous about putting this work out into there. I know what that's like. I've written a couple books and I remember being like putting my heart and soul out there, particularly with my memoir and just, but the moment like published, the moment it came out, there was something that was set free in me. This couldn't have described what it would be until it happened. What are you nervous about in terms of this book going out in the world?
I don't think I fully know. I want to be clear about that. I know that I enjoyed the process of writing the book. That was great. Took 5 years. Loved it. I mean, not all the time, but I enjoyed the process. Now I'm like in this zone where I get to or have to tell people to buy it. And then I'm like, crap, now I'm in evaluation mode. And I never wrote this book I'm thinking of it as being good or bad. But now when I'm telling people to put their money into purchasing it, I now am going to be at risk of now having this expression of mine be viewed as good or bad, worth the money that was being spent or not. And then I'm like, well, shit, I don't know if it's good enough to merit someone spending their hard-earned money on this thing. I don't know. And I think that's a real convenient argument that's quite logical and makes sense to my brain. But I think underneath the surface, which is a hard thing for me sometimes to make contact with, is actually just a whole lot of vulnerability. Because I'm afraid that you're not going to like something that comes from my heart. And that I'm afraid that you might not love me if what you experience you don't perceive as being good. It goes back to my core wound. And I think this process of releasing the book is right there in the midst of it.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because that is just like, that's truth. You can feel that. It's like, yeah, I'm putting something out from my heart. And what if the world tells me that it's not good? Then that means that maybe I'm not good and I'm not lovable. And that's the fundamental human fear that we all share on some level. And I love that you're courageous enough and vulnerable enough to just put that out there, because it is tender to put your out into the world, and especially something that's so close to your heart or from your heart, and also feels like your truth, like your worldview. You're putting it out there, and we expose ourselves. I mean, vulnerability, the essence of that is that we could be injured or wounded, and so I think it's natural to have fear around that.
Yeah, thanks. This question reminded me of the vulnerability lying underneath the surface.
Yeah, and it's and for the record, not that you need my reassurance, but like I said, I was pleasantly surprised. I think this is a book that you can pre-order it now on Amazon, yes.
On everything, yes, on Amazon.
It's not released until February 11th. But I would highly recommend to all of my listeners, but also in my coaching practice. This is a book that I will purchase and loan to people. I carry a lot of, I have hundreds of books there's always the right book for the right person. But this one is a really great kind of dip your toes into the water, especially for someone who's never maybe done any shadow work, or they're not. And, they think they're so, like, my son is in recovery now for almost 3 years. And he says, the thing that was almost the death of me was that I thought I was terminally unique. In the way that I was flawed and I was suffering, and like nobody else was this bad. And I think that your book has this way of kind of cutting through that illusion of terminal uniqueness, and allowing people to see themselves as just like, oh, this is part of the human journey, and I'm right where I'm supposed to be. And now, and I love that. It's so great.
Well, thank you for taking the time. That is feels like an honor that you took the time to really read it and process it in your own way. So thank you. Thanks for honoring the work and my work in that way. That feels really like sweet. And that's the first time I've really been able to tell someone that I think, I've given the book away to friends that are in the acknowledgements and whatnot, but I think I haven't really been able to like receive someone's feedback as like actually having taken the time to read the book. And that feels really that feels like a great gift that you've given me is honoring me with your time and taking care of reading the book. So I really appreciate that.
It was a great read, and like I said, I read 52 books last year, and some of them weren't that great, even by authors that you would are supposed to be so great, and I was like, and yours was really moving and beautiful, and I think it's going to touch humanity in a powerful way, and I think it has the potential to become a classic. Thank you so much for being here today. I loved our conversation. I hope our listeners get a lot out of it. Best of luck with your book. Where can people find you if they want to follow you? You're such an interesting guy, and I think people are going to want to follow you. Where can they best find you?
Yeah, I think my social media profiles. So Schabelmania on Instagram and YouTube. It's my last name plus IA. And I will be releasing a podcast this week, actually called Rebelle, RE-BELLE. So it's about really beautiful humans, and there might be some rebelliousness in there as well.
I love it. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And everyone who's listening, go get the book, Captains Wanted by Andres Schabelman. You will not regret it. It will be on your bookshelf for your lifetime, and you can share it with all your friends.
Thank you.
Until next time.